Hey, so it's been a really long time since I've done this. The last time I posted a video to YouTube in particular about my journey, it's probably in 2018. So the last time you saw me was 5 years ago. I would have had dreadlocks. I would have looked a lot different. But one of those differences is I no longer have a central line or a portacath or a PIC line. So obviously there's been some positive changes. Uh, I get comments all the time, people asking, like, I wonder how you're doing now. And truth be told, I was posting so much in the first couple years of my journey just because it consumed my life. I wasn't functional enough to work, to really do much at all. So I was sharing, trying to create awareness, trying to contribute in some sort of advocacy role. But eventually, I guess you could say, like, the wear and tear of the illness, it just starts to weigh on you. So I would say by the end of 2018, my mental health was not in the best of places. I kind of regressed back into just closing myself off, not feeling like I had the time or the energy to make these videos. Also, in a lot of ways, I was tired of focusing on it. Like, I felt like it was just too much. It just starts to consume you at some point. So that is why there's been such a huge gap. I'm going to do the briefest summary of the last 10 years that I can right now before I kind of launch into an update of the past 3 years, because I just feel like without me talking for 2 hours, I don't know how to condense everything that's happened. So back in 2014, I had a bite mark. I went to the clinic. They thought it was a spider bite. I wasn't treated. I didn't know any better. I didn't advocate for myself. It took 2 years before I was diagnosed. At that point, I was really, really sick. My husband was, by the time we got to the Lyme litter, a doctor pushing me in a wheelchair. He was brushing my teeth for me. He was toileting me. I was basically completely dependent for care. I did a year and a half, 2 years on IV antibiotics. And then I moved into functional medicine at a clinic in Europe. I went there 3 different times, and then found something closer here in Canada. So between 2019 and 2021, I tried to maintain what I had gained back through natural treatment. And basically, when I did this first year and a half on antibiotics, like, absolutely to this day, I will never say it didn't change my life, because it did. It saved my life. It got me to a certain point, but then I plateaued. I was so sick during treatment, like, all I did was throw up. So we switched. And then I kind of maintained where I was at, but also just kind of slowly got worse. By the time 2021, actually, let's go back to 2020. By the time 2020 came around, pre-pandemic, I had seen a infectious disease. No, rewind. Sorry. Like, again, this is why I'm trying to be concise, because this is such a long story. In 2020, I saw a rheumatologist in Manitoba, and it was kind of like, we'd kind of come full circle. I wasn't getting better. My family doctor was like, like, maybe we're missing something. Let's kind of just start at the beginning. So that's what we did. And she was very accommodating to my fears and my concerns. She didn't write me off. There was no gaslighting, which that was like my biggest fear, because of course, in this whole grand scheme of things, I think all of us have had some really negative experiences with doctors. But I just kind of said to her, until you can, like, prove to me, like, without a shadow of a doubt, that there isn't an active infection, I'm just not willing at this time to start, like, prednisone or something, even though it's going to momentarily make me feel better. If there is an infection, it's really counterproductive. She heard me. She listened to me. At this point, one of the biggest symptoms, like, aside from the fact that I was regressing and needing more help day to day again, but one of the, I could say, physical things that doctors could actually see. Luckily, I don't have any right now. Otherwise, I could show you. But I would get these really big lumps. They were in my wrists, and then they migrated, and they started happening, like, all over my skull, on my forehead. So she was able to see them. They would come and go so quick. It didn't resemble any autoimmune illness that she could think of. She referred me out for genetic testing. And then in the end, I had left her office. We were in a taxi on the way to the airport, and I had a call from her, and she said, something about this feels parasitic to me. I'm going to send you to an infectious disease specialist at the travel clinic. So it's part of the Winnipeg Regional Health Authority travel medicine section with public health. So this infectious disease doctor is used to seeing people who are traveling and pick up illnesses, infectious illnesses abroad and wherever else. He did a few tests. I had some equivocal results, some confusing results even to him. He's like, something about this doesn't make sense. And then right before the pandemic, he said, there's just like this one thing that I feel like it could be. It's super rare. You've never traveled to Asia or Central or South America. I don't know where you would have picked this up, but it's a parasitic infection called GNATHOSTOMIASIS. And let's just rule it out. So he had to pull some strings to get a blood sample sent over to Thailand because we don't test for it in North America because you just don't contract it here, or so we know, at least at this point. So sure enough, he calls me months later because then at this point the pandemic happened, and the labs were not quite on top of all of the other things. So a few months later he calls and he's like, "You're never gonna believe this." And I was like, well, I do, because there's nothing else that can explain this, and I can tell by the sound of your voice, like, medically you're interested and curious. So long story short, the result came back positive. You can Google GNATHOSTOMIASIS. You can read about it, but I don't really think it's relevant. The only thing here where this was kind of one of those pivotal changing points is that there's really only two antiparasitic medications that they use to treat it. We tried both of them. I had response to both of them. And then the lumps and stuff didn't stop. But I had a very clear response both times I took these two different medications. So to me, it was very clear that there was a link. But because it's rare, it's undocumented, there's not a lot of literature. Basically, when I didn't respond in the couple ways that literature supports treating, he was just like, well, I don't know. I never saw him again. He just basically stopped answering my phone calls. But like I said, at this point, my family doctor and I were trying to uncover different paths now. I've used programs that our health insurance has called Best Doctors. I sent all of my records to them. It had an expert review. At this point, we're going down the road of talking about a spinal tap, taking the spinal fluid and sending it to the CDC for tests for all of these other weird and random illnesses and infections. So I'm in our local operating room getting a biopsy on one of these lumps on my wrist. We're trying to aspirate any kind of fluid out of it and send it away for testing. The hard part about that is when you aspirate anything, including the spinal fluid, when we were going to send it to the CDC, you can't just say, test this for infections. You have to list what you're testing it for. And that's where pathology is really difficult. I was really fortunate both surgeons that were in the OR with me that day were Lyme literate. One of them was new to town and kind of began with asking really probing, almost invasive questions about how I treated it in the past. And he asked about antibiotics. He asked about a doctor in the States. And I didn't really want to go into it because of the targeted way that he was asking questions. I thought he was going to become very negative and kind of belittle me or judge me or have harsh words towards me for choosing a longer antibiotic treatment at the point in time. But it turns out that was the opposite. He had a friend whose daughter had seen the same doctor I had started seeing back in 2016. And again, he had saved my life. He had saved this girl's life. And the surgeon said to me, why are we doing this to you? You know what's wrong. Why don't you go back to go back to that doctor? Why are we cutting parts and pieces out of you? Because at this point I'd had a few different biopsies of lesions and stuff that I was getting on my legs and whatnot at this point too. So I was in tears because this man I'd never met before was so passionate about me seeking help, me feeling better, the fact that I shouldn't be going through what I'm going through for as long as I've been going through it. I was 27 when I was bitten. I'm 37 now. It's been 10 years. Definitely not how I expected kind of like the prime part of my adulthood to unfold, but that's a different story, I guess. So in the end, I'm in tears because of the compassion and the conviction that he has for me and for me seeking proper treatment. And I promised him when I walked out of the OR, he actually walked me all the way to my car. I promised him with all of these tears in my eyes, I would at least call the clinic I had originally been with, set up an initial appointment again, and then just kind of see where I was going from there. At that point, I did. I went home. I cried in bed. I sent a contact form, and I didn't think about it again. And then the next day, I woke up and thought, what am I going to do when they call? Like, I don't want to go back on antibiotics. In my head, I felt like if I started antibiotics again, I failed myself. I failed the last few years of trying to do this naturally. But anyways, at this point, my husband and I were like, okay, well, if they call, let's set up the appointment, let's do the initial, and it will be essentially just information gathering. I'm not committing to antibiotics. I'm not committing to anything. Let's just have a conversation. So many tears in the span of like 48 hours, but that's essentially what happened next. I went back to Washington in spring of 2021. At this point, I had regressed so badly. I'm getting like flashbacks of 2016 of me in wheelchairs. Steven's helping me get dressed every day again. It's just not looking good. So there was a lot of fear in going back, but also at the same time, that familiarity and knowing I was at least in the hands of people who understood this illness was really helpful. So I went back in 2021, started antibiotics again, pulsed. And it was really like 6 months later, I had seen a big change. I still had my PICC line in. So throughout all of the natural treatment, I had my central line on this side originally for IV antibiotics. And then I had, when I was treating naturally, it was still intravenous treatment. And so we put a portacath in. I have a scar that broke. Again, a whole other story. I was air ambulanced out because the catheter landed in my heart. But after the portacath broke, I still had all of these IV kits. So I had a PICC line put in over here, and so I still have this at the time I go back to my doctor in DC for antibiotic treatment. We do not do IV antibiotics, even though I have a line. Kind of just using that for lactated ringers and hydration. I see a bit of improvement over the next 6 months. Now we're talking January 2022. Again, I'm noticing changes at this point. I'm feeling the best, probably honestly, that I had in the entire timeline of me dealing with this. I can't say why suddenly antibiotics made a bigger change than they did in the beginning. It could have been everything in between, kind of the just like missing links that we were kind of plugging in. I don't have that answer. I started using the wave 1 at the same time that I started antibiotics. Is that part of it? It very well could be. But again, there's too many variables for me to say with 100% certainty it was like this one thing. So I think it was a combination of everything over the years. And then in February, my PICC line becomes infected. I also had COVID at the same time. So when I had a fever and was brought to the hospital, like delirious, like projectile vomit, like I was super sick with an infected PICC line. It was actually misinterpreted that the fever was a COVID fever. So my PICC line had been accessed a couple more times. And finally, after being in the hospital with like a 42-degree fever, like I was really sick, realized it was my PICC line. On the next dressing change, go back up to the hospital. They pull it out. Cultures came back positive. It was indeed infected. I did not get septic, which is absolutely amazing because the dressing change happened twice while it was infected, so it was flushed twice, and I tried running fluids 2 different times. So 4 different times it was accessed while it was infected. So I think the fact that I didn't become septic is a really great indication that I was getting stronger, like my body was getting stronger. And then after that period where I had this like absolutely terrible fever, like within the next month, I saw a big improvement. So again, did that fever contribute? You know, like a lot of people do hyperthermia treatment for Lyme disease and cancers. So maybe, again, it's just one of those things. There's too many variables. You can't say with 100% certainty it was like this one thing. So I'm improving by March of 2022. In the summer, I'm still seeing an improvement. I'm going longer without any issues. The lumps are getting better. And again, there's so many like side stories to all of this, but at this point, I had also been using the Beachbody programs and coaching myself because they were a huge part of me getting to where I'm at. Again, a different story for a different time, but I went to our coach summit in St. Louis. First time I drove on the highway by myself in years. I had a 4-hour drive to the airport, did all the flying by myself, carried all the luggage by myself, did this 3-day event, including like a 3-hour workout in like the streets of St. Louis. I did it. And then I bawled my eyes out afterwards. It was one of the most cathartic experiences. Just being able to have the freedom to move your body and make those choices. But at that point I was doing really well. I had another follow-up and they're like, okay, you have like, now you've climbed to the top of the mountain. We need to like slowly get you back down the other side. So at this point, once you've kind of got to the top and you're coming back down, they pull back on some of the meds and basically hope that you stay, my clinic calls them blue sky days. So that we pull back on some of the treatment and hope that I'm still having really good days. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. At this point, I realized there was one medication in particular that I am the most responsive to, which is still a bit of a puzzle to my clinic, my doctors. It's one of the anti-parasitic medications. It's used in a lot of people's treatment with Lyme disease, but more specifically to Babesia, and I don't have any Babesia symptoms. Again, parallels between 2020 and being diagnosed with the parasite and the anti-parasitic meds being the ones that seem to work for me, even though my doctor would classify my symptoms and my clinical presentation more as a Bartonella infection. So I'm a little bit of not a straight path forward in terms of what they usually see, but again, that is what it is. So we take out one of these meds, I get worse again, I contact the clinic, I tell them, and I'm like, I'm adding it back. Like, I know it made a difference, and it did. So by this point, I have notes here because, again, I'm at 20 minutes, and I thought this was going to be a 10-minute video. So at this point, basically, for summer, I regress, I move back up because of the meds. I've put this anti-parasitic back in, so now we're at the beginning of 2023, and I feel like I'm in a standstill for the first half of this year. I'm doing all right, but I don't feel like I was as good as I was in the summer of 2022. And then we made a couple tweaks. I went back for a follow-up in April, and at that point, they were really happy with the progress. We were really happy with the progress. It was to the point where we could almost actually see like the end in sight. At my clinic, they have one of those bells on the wall that you get to ring. And I was like, that bell actually seems like a reality that I'm going to get to ring that someday a little bit sooner than I honestly, I don't know that I ever expected I was going to ring it. But at this point, I can see myself ringing it. I know I'm getting close. So we made another switch, and at this point in April, now they're like, okay, we're going to have you, with my pulse protocols, it's kind of like 2 weeks on, 1 week off, 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. And it kind of just like, it's based on me, my symptoms, how I'm responding, all sorts of things. But when I go in April, they're like, okay, we're going to give you the most time off we've ever given you. You're going to have 2 weeks on, 3 weeks off. And our goal is that you have these good days continue for those full 3 weeks. And then when we go back on antibiotics, if you herx really hard, then we know we're like kind of still actively treating. So we're basically looking for the herx to lower while you get more time off. And that's kind of how they move you into like maintenance therapy, which will be another story for another day down the road. So that was what we did in April. Again, I responded negatively when we pulled out that anti-parasitic medication. So I added all back in. I also clued in one of the meds that we used to treat GNATHOSTOMIASIS that I said made a difference for me was ivermectin. It was one of the medications in my protocol. It was also causing lesions on my legs. So I had stopped it around the same time that we had made those med changes. And that's when I had started seeing a regression. Again, take out these 2 antiparasitic medications and I'm getting more symptomatic again. So we added back in. Again, I did both at the same time. So I can't tell you which one really made the biggest difference. But it helped. I went through the summer like this. And then in September, I had a follow-up again, and we talked about it. And at this point, it's very clear we're all on the same page that I am responding to these antiparasitics. And we kind of have one more in our toolbox to try, the other one that I used for the GNATHOSTOMIASIS infection. So in September, my protocol changed. It was the 2 weeks as kind of expected. And then we added a 3rd week with this other antiparasitic. And I've only done 1 round of it, and then I had 3 weeks off, and I've kind of had like a catapulted positive response forward again. Just 1 second. I've been talking for 20 minutes straight now. So that's basically where I'm at. I hope this has answered a lot of questions. On Instagram, a lot of people have said, I've noticed you're on a full protocol again. What happened? I've always been on a full protocol. I just get more time off in between right now. So it probably looks like, okay, she's done. But I'm right now 3 weeks on, 3 weeks off. And I'm in the middle, or just finished week 2. So I have week 3 on, and then I have 3 weeks off. I'll follow up again with my clinic in January. And I'm hoping that we can pull back on a lot of the medications, keeping those ones in. They seem like they've actually been working, and then maybe even a little bit more time off. Other changes throughout this whole thing, as I mentioned, I started using workout programs. A 2-pound weight was too much when I started, but being really consistent with that, again, it's a total other story, but using certain programs was absolutely game-changing for me. Focusing on mindset work, not just a mental health therapist, but like actual daily like mindset coaching, going through all the hard questions, that sort of thing was also a huge part of changes for me. I feel like when I was so sick for so long, I started saying I can't to like everything because I physically couldn't, and that I can't bled out into like every area of my life. And I recognized it and knew I had to change. So there's a lot of work that went on there. I took part in some Tony Robbins courses and like events. So all of that was really pivotal. I brought a lot of that back to my therapy appointments to actually unpack it with a little bit extra help. And then since this past July or August, I've also been using an AMP coil. Kind of just trying to layer that in with the antibiotic protocols. It is a really powerful machine, I can tell you that, when I use it with the Lyme related sets to like deal with infections. The Herx is very, very real. Luckily, it also has a set that is to help the Herxing, which I use a lot when I'm on the antibiotics as well. So it's also been a really great tool that I've layered in there. But yeah, I mean, for the sake of me not making a 30-minute video, I'm going to try and cut this now at 24 minutes. Hopefully this kind of brings everything back full circle, explains the last 10 years without having to talk for an hour and a half. Again, if you go backwards on my YouTube channel, there's lots of videos about like all the nitty gritties I was going through in that first year and a half. My Instagram, again, I document a lot of it every day. I have story highlights that are like Lyme Life parts 1 through 8 now. Parts 1 and 2 are like back in 2016 up to the current day. So if you're kind of looking for more timeline information, just more in general, that's the best place for you to find it, is over on Instagram and the story highlights. And yeah, if there's more people want to hear, just leave comments. I will get to another video hopefully again someday. And I just want to say thanks to everyone who's watched these videos, who cares enough just to keep themselves informed, to everyone that's been supportive along the way, online, in person, and I think if you're watching this and you feel like I'm talking to you, I am. So anyways, that's all.